welcome to Monkey Time. This is Raleigh's, are we longest running yet, or is there still one more ahead of us? We've been doing Raleigh Cable Access for a long time. Every Wednesday at 8 o'clock, we're live, and we have a great guest, and I'm so honored to have you here. Tom Jensen is, thank you for coming, by the way.
Thank you.
You are the Director of Public Policy Polling, which is an outfit based here in Raleigh that didn't really hit much of the national radar before the 2008 election. Is that fair to say? You're still the new kids on the block in the polling world?
Yeah, I mean, I think the 2008 election for us was really a bit of a coming out period. We started polling really all over the country. Before that, we'd been really focused on North Carolina stuff, really very specifically Wake County stuff. People knew that we polled the Raleigh mayoral election, but in 2008, we started really polling all the swing states in the presidential race across the country, and of course, it was a really high interest election, and we've just kind of been going since then.
And one of the things that happened, he's being a little modest, one of the things that happened is you really nailed some of those primary states. You got a couple kind of wrong, but
sure.
Most of the times or many times you were way ahead of the curve. This small little outfit in Raleigh with what, how many people?
Well, at that time, we had one full-time employee. We've expanded since then.
How many do you have now?
We have 3 people are full-time and then a bunch of people who help out.
That's still pretty small,
yeah.
Right, for a polling outfit? Mm-hmm. And you guys nailed a bunch of the state primaries where Obama in South Carolina, Hillary Clinton in New Hampshire, was it?
Well, what actually happened to sort of make us start polling on a national basis was with that New Hampshire primary in 2008. We didn't poll it, but all the big names polled it, the Gallups, ABCs, CBSs, or whatever, and they all got it wrong. They all said that Barack Obama was going to win, and of course Hillary ended up pulling off the upset, and we said, well, you know, if all these big names can't get a big race like this right, maybe we should try, and then did, as you say. We had some missteps, but we had a lot of success as well.
And you've generally become very respected and certainly very often cited. So how is what you do different from other polling companies?
Well, we really have sort of 2 polling companies in one. We're a Democratic polling company, and we work for Democratic candidates and progressive causes, and that's where all of our funding comes in from, is the polling we do for private clients.
That's how I knew we were going to lose on Amendment 1, Carol. This guy's really smart. And when they were saying, you might want to back off on your expectations, I was like, I knew. I had to keep Carol's expectations down, too.
Yeah.
Sorry for interrupting.
No, it was that was certainly disappointing. And I'm very happy to say that's disappointing. I mean, that is one thing that makes us different from other polling companies, is we do have a perspective, and that doesn't seep into our numbers. But certainly we really wanted Amendment 1 to be defeated, and we were sort of in an awkward position where we really wanted Amendment 1 to be defeated, and at the same time we were the ones telling everybody, well, Amendment 1's going to pass, and it's going to pass by a lot. So sometimes we have to be the bearer of bad news. So,
well, we're going to get back to that accusations of bias, you being a Democratic polling company,
sure.
Later on. But go ahead. How are you different?
And then what makes us really different is there's a lot of companies that do that sort of private stuff for Democratic candidates and causes. What we do that's different is we pour a lot of the revenue from that into doing polls that are for public consumption. We poll 2 or 3 states across the country every week, do a really comprehensive poll, and that's really what sort of has built up our national profile. Is media people in Washington or New York or whatever know that if they want to find an Ohio poll, we're going to have a recent Ohio poll somewhere on our website. We're going to have a recent Florida poll. If they want to know what the approval rating of some governor in some far-flung state is, we probably have it. So that's what's different, is sort of adding that public aspect to what we do in addition to the for-profit stuff.
And that helps you get your name out there because people, the journalists love a good horse race. Well, isn't that kind of a problem, the fact that the journalists need these numbers constantly? We can look back at numbers from the race in March.
Yeah.
Ooh, Obama's at this and Romney's at this and head-to-head matches against all. And doesn't that seem kind of silly that far out now, looking back? And can't we really say the same thing today about poll numbers? How do you respond to the criticism, which I've leveled a lot on the show and in the past in my life as a journalist, that the newspapers just want horse race data, and that churn of information is not very useful overall? How do you respond to that? It gets in the way. It actively hurts.
I agree that it would be better if journalists sort of kept better perspective on poll results. One thing that sort of drives us crazy as a polling company is that journalists really latch on to polls that are wrong. And the reason I sort of say that is, there's a pretty strong consensus that the presidential race is a 2, 3, 4-point race right now. Barack Obama has a very modest advantage. And if you come out with a poll that says Barack Obama has a modest advantage, it's not going to get a lot of attention. But if you come out with a poll right now and say Obama's up by 13, or come out with a poll and say Romney's up by 5, those are the polls that get a lot of attention because there's a story there that's different from the overall story. Now, if everybody's saying Obama's up by 3 and you say Obama's up by 15 or that he's down by 5, you're probably wrong, but the media loves to latch onto those sort of outlier polls.
It keeps the excitement going on a day-to-day basis, and they sell newspapers or get eyeballs, right?
Yeah, absolutely. So, I mean, I certainly agree that we're part of the problem, and we laugh at ourselves. We're putting out an Iowa 2016 poll tomorrow, and God knows who's even going to run for president in 2016 at this point. But from our perspective as a business, there's a strong appetite for that, and we are sort of going to.
Oh, you're not doing it as a punk-ass joke? You're doing it for serious? Like, oh, that's really? You're seriously going to put it out there and see how many of them bite at this information?
Oh, I guarantee you it'll be on like MSNBC within 2 hours, like, because everybody wants to talk about Hillary 2016. I'll give you an exclusive before this comes out tomorrow on this poll that you probably think is totally worthless, and maybe rightfully so.
Oh, he puts maybe in there.
Hillary's at 60% in Iowa right now. 60% of Democrats want Hillary to be the candidate in 2016. And that's just
that whooping, Carol? Did I hear whooping?
That's just going to feed all this discussion. Is she or is she not? And people are going to say it's hard for Hillary not to run when 60% of Democrats in Iowa want her. Now, 4 years ago at this time, nobody had heard, or 8 years ago, I guess now at this time, nobody had heard of Barack Obama. So that's the limitation in this kind of thing. But
you're feeding it.
Yeah, we are feeding it. No, and I'm not going to apologize for that.
You shouldn't.
It's our job to feed it, and it's your job to be restrained and
to poop it
biting.
out. To poop it out. Okay. I think that's wonderful. And you do have kind of public policy polling is I should, in case you just joined us, we're talking with Tom Jensen, who, do you see how professional I can be?
It's very good.
Tom Jensen, who is the director of public policy polling, which from just this little outfit here in Raleigh, North Carolina, mostly doing state races, has blossomed into this national polling outfit, ranked right up there. You get as much press as Gallup and all the others, and are often more right than Zogby and places like that. Just on the strength of your excellent results? Is that what it is?
That's the main thing. I think ultimately the first barrier for any polling company to be taken seriously is to show that it knows what it's doing, get some races right, hopefully get a lot of races right. And then I think beyond that, the reason we get a fair amount of attention is we're very prolific. You know that PPP is going to put out a poll every day, pretty much, probably 2 or 3 polls every day. And then we do, as you've alluded to a little bit, we poll on stuff that other pollsters won't necessarily poll on. We ask some of the quirkier questions that are kind of funny. Maybe
give us some examples.
We did a poll last March testing at sort of the height of the Charlie Sheen craze. We did a Sarah Palin versus Charlie Sheen presidential poll. And
among Republican voters?
Among everybody. Yeah. And Charlie Sheen was winning against Sarah Palin among independent voters. And on the one hand, you can look at that and say, oh, this is really stupid. But this is when it was still sort of seen that the chances of Sarah Palin running for president were 50-50. And I think a lot of people, Republicans, did sort of look at that and say, God, if Sarah Palin is running behind Charlie Sheen with independents in a presidential poll, we really need her to not run and do everything we can to keep her out.
So some of these questions you put out there, with a political bent. You want to change what's the political reality out there with your polls.
Yeah, and in more recent examples, during the Republican primaries, we were polling a lot on, do you think Obama is a Muslim? Do you think Obama was born in the United States? And that makes people really mad. You're getting into sensitive topics like religion and racism and that kind of thing. But I think it helps to really understand the state of the modern Republican Party, to know that only 15% of Republicans in Mississippi think that Obama's a Christian and that most of the rest think that he's a Muslim. I mean, I think that really does tell us something when you wonder why a lot of Republican politicians are sort of walking off the cliff with some of these statements that they make. They're just speaking for the base. I mean, that is what a large number of Republican voters think. And they're reasonable Republicans who are really embarrassed by this kind of stuff. And they're sort of embarrassed by the base of their party. And I apologize for that, but the reality is that the reasonable Republicans we find in our polling is very much a minority within the base.
You took a lot of flack from some right-wing outlets for exposing that with questions like, if the rapture were held today, would Obama go to heaven? That's a punk question. That's a punk. I love that. That's kind of a punk move, and you got a lot of flack. And you defend those. You're defending them right now as those are. We need to know that stuff.
Yeah, well, I mean, first of all, we have really thick skin because we get it from everybody. We put out a poll in New Mexico this week. Yesterday, we put out the Senate numbers, and when we put out the Senate numbers yesterday, all the Republicans complained that the poll was biased against them. Then we put out the presidential numbers today. All the Democrats complained that the poll is biased against them. It's the same sample both days, so we're sort of used to getting it up from all sides. But more to your point, I think there's a couple reasons for doing those kinds of questions. One, and again, I don't, people probably think this is bad, but I don't apologize for it. Polls can have an entertainment value, and we ask about some stuff that's kind of silly, kind of goofy, because it makes people laugh. I mean, they enjoy it, and we're taking the question seriously. There's serious science behind the numbers that are going into it, but if we ask something totally off the wall and it gives somebody a laugh, I'm fine with that. We did a poll a couple months ago seeing how Ted Nugent would be in Michigan as Mitt Romney's running mate. Obviously, Mitt Romney is not going to pick Ted Nugent as his running mate, but people were kind of amused to see how that would play out, and I think that's fine.
And in the pop culture soup of this of our culture, basically,
Yeah.
in this where everything's fair game, and Lord knows there's that mixture between politics and pop culture. Why not?
Yeah.
Why not?
Well,
say we participate in that.
that's our attitude.
No, I think that's interesting. I like that. I like that about you guys. What's different about your techniques? Because there is, and this is a leading question because I think I know the answer, but can you describe what public policy polling based here in Raleigh does that makes you more affordable than other polling outfits, and how that impacts on your accuracy?
Sure. Well, the sort of traditional way of doing polls for most of the last 30 or 40 years has been to have a call center with a bunch of live people calling folks and sort of doing the interviews one by one, individual conversations, that sort of thing. And that's a good way of doing a poll, but it's also really expensive because you have to hire all those people to make those calls. So what we've done, and what an increasing number of polling companies have been doing, especially over the last 5 to 10 years, is automated phone calls, where we just record the poll and we load it into an automated dialing machine, and it calls 30,000 people at once, and they all get asked the exact same questions in the exact same way, and they...
Tone of voice isn't an issue?
Nope.
No, nothing, because it's all the same recording.
Yep, and then people answer them by pushing buttons on their phone. If you approve of Barack Obama, press 1. If you disapprove, press 2. If you're not sure, press 3. And what that allows us to do is it's a lot more affordable, which our business has actually really increased during the recession, because a lot of organizations that maybe used to do a $15,000 live interview poll every year don't have the money for that anymore, but they want to stay in the polling game, so they'll hire us to do a $2,500 automated poll. It's about 80% cheaper, and you can't go into as much depth. You can't have surveys that are as long. We tend to need to keep our polls to 15 or 20 questions.
You can't branch off in detailed ways as you could with a live human.
Yeah, you can't ask open-ended questions, which a lot of the time I think are really illuminating, but I think it gives people a pretty accurate, pretty affordable option for doing polls.
And on simple questions like who's going to win the election and who are you going to vote for, your reliability compares with the other polling outfits that use live people.
Yep, study after study has shown there's no difference in predictive accuracy between automated polls and live interview polls.
That's
now,
amazing. What's your response rate? Because you realize when you talk about, you push a button, 30,000 phones ring all over the land, many people will hate you.
Yeah.
So what's your response rate?
Usually about 10% of people will answer when we call for a poll. And it's kind of interesting. That sounds really low, and it is. And there's a couple groups that are sort of more prone to answering polls. Seniors answer polls more than younger people. White people tend to answer polls more than minorities, and women tend to answer polls more than men. And this is true across the board, regardless of the kind of poll you're doing. So one thing that's become increasingly important for pollsters is to be able to take that raw data, which maybe doesn't look exactly like the electorate, and weight it so that you have a final finished product that does look like the overall electorate. And a lot of that is what sort of separates accurate polls from inaccurate polls.
That's where the science comes in.
Absolutely.
The science of the sample.
Science and a little art. I mean, in North Carolina, figuring out whether you think 23% of the vote this fall is going to be African American or 20% of the vote this fall is going to be African American could very well be the difference between whether you say Barack Obama is going to win or Mitt Romney is going to win. So it's an important thing. And
I bet it's more art than science. No. You can call in. Let me just interrupt for a second. You can call in. I should have said that earlier, to talk with Tom Jensen, who's the director of public policy polling, based right here in Raleigh, but with a national reputation, which we all, I don't know, we should feel proud of too, I guess. So our number's down 996-6775. Just call up and we'll put you through. So the robocall, you get a response rate of 10%. How does that compare to live? When a live person calls somebody, what's their response rate?
Live interview response rates are falling more down into the 10 to 20% range now as well. Those used to be really high. A generation ago, 40 or 50% of people would answer polls. People liked answering polls, and those days are really over. People don't like getting called at home. If they pick up the phone and it's somebody they don't know, they don't necessarily want to stay on the line for a long time and answer a lot of questions. It's just really reflective, I think, of a society that's gotten more technologically advanced, and it's really old school to kind of stay there on the phone and answer a poll. I think we have to come up with better ways moving forward of finding ways to do polling on the internet, because I think people are going to be more comfortable with that moving forward.
Tom Jensen from Public Policy Polling. You can call us up, 996-6775. Do you want to get to some of the meat here? I'd love to discuss the numbers in the Walter Dalton race, the
Sure.
race for governor in North Carolina. We've got Dalton, and we've got McCrory. And right now, what do the numbers look like, and what do you see as the trends? And I know, I'm not going to ask you to make specific
Sure.
predictions, but can you answer? What are the numbers looking like right now? Will we have not only Republicans in the House and Senate, but a Republican governor, which is a horrifying thought to me.
I mean, certainly if I had to put money on it, we are going to have a state government totally controlled by Republicans next year. Right now, we find Pat McCrory with a 7-point lead, 43-36. Sort of the good news for Walter Dalton. McCrory's only at 43%. It's not a situation where McCrory's already over 50. And the trend lines in that race actually are good for Democrats. When we first polled that Dalton-McCrory matchup in January, Pat McCrory had a 15-point lead. And as Walter Dalton's become better known, he's chipped away at that a fair amount. And the other thing that's a little bit encouraging for Dalton is that if you look at the undecideds in the governor's race, they're voting for Barack Obama for president by a 20-point margin. The undecideds skew very Democratic, and it's just a situation.
In North Carolina?
Yeah.
Boy, someone should tell Rob Christensen that. He doesn't seem to know this news.
And it's just a situation where Republicans know Pat McCrory, so they're already totally lined up behind him. Democrats right now, a lot are still undecided. So if people end
It's
up...
simple name recognition at this point,
Absolutely.
isn't it? Isn't that
is.
it? I mean, so doesn't that give McCrory a chance? If he
Yeah.
can up his name recognition?
Yeah, if people voted the same if the undecided voters voted the same party for governor that they're planning to vote for president, you're looking at a 3 or 4 point race for governor. And that's something that with 3.5 months to the election, you can make up a 3 or 4 point deficit. Just to put these numbers into some perspective, if we'd been sitting here 4 years ago today, I would have told you that Kay Hagan was trailing Elizabeth Dole by 15 points.
Really?
Yeah, but Hagan was getting totally blown out at this point.
Just purely on name recognition?
Just purely on name recognition. And Kay Hagan made up 24 points in the last 3 months of the campaign. Now, a lot of unique circumstances there. But it can happen.
That's perspective.
Yes.
Let's take this call. Hi, you're on the air with Tom Jensen. Can you hear us?
Yeah, absolutely. Hey, how's it going, Todd?
Good. How are you?
I'm doing good, long-time viewer. I just have a question, and I'm sure your interviewee there has a lot of understanding of how the science behind polling works, but in just attaching a number to a topic that excites people. But I'm just curious to know his thoughts on the evolution of polling. What direction does he think it's going to take in the next 5 to 10 years?
Great question. Do you want to stay on the line or do you want to hang up? It's up to you.
Stay on the line.
Okay.
Yeah, that is a great question, and it's really the most important question facing the polling industry right now. Telephone polling is becoming obsolete. Obviously, more and more people have only cell phones, and more pollsters are calling cell phones, but people don't want to answer a poll on their cell phone. If you call somebody at 7:30 at night and they're at the gym, they're not going to, sit there and answer a poll for half
per
an
minute
hour.
fees, thank you very much. Per minute fees, some of us, I don't use it very much, but go ahead.
And then and then obviously fewer and fewer people have landlines, so it's hard to do landline phone polling too. So I think that what we're going to see over the next 2 years is more and more a blend of polling on the internet and still doing phone polling to people who aren't really comfortable with the internet, older people who are easier to reach still with telephone polls. The reason more internet polling hasn't taken off yet is it's hard to get a random sample, which is of course the sort of the foundation of a good poll. There's not a huge national email database you can tap into the way that there is for phones. But I think that people are coming up with better and better ways of doing it, and that
really there are technological solutions to just a handful of people jamming or loading up what's the word I'm looking for? Distorting a poll, skewing a poll, an internet poll.
It's going to be a situation moving forward where you don't really go to the poll comes to you. So it's not going to be like going to WRAL and voting 250 times or whatever, but polling companies will build panels of people on the internet who, if they're doing a poll in North Carolina, they can email a random sample of 600 people in North Carolina. Right now, it's still pretty expensive because to build those panels, you're calling people to build the internet panel. And in a lot of cases, if you call somebody and they don't have internet, polling companies will provide people with the internet in order to be able to really have a truly random sample. Now, that is not cost effective on a broad scale. But what I'm,
doesn't that distort the sample though? I guess. I guess
it's actually what they're doing.
It doesn't distort the sample. Yeah, that makes sense. They're just finding people and then saying, yeah, let's give you the internet.
So we can't do polls for our customers at the same rates that we are right now if we have to buy people's internet, which is why you're not seeing this happen on a broad scale yet. But I think that especially 2020 presidential election cycle, when Hillary Clinton's running for re-election or whatever, polling's going to look a lot different than it does now.
Anything else, caller?
Yeah, one more question, real quick. I don't want him to go too far into his trade secrets, but I'm just curious to know, how do you guys filter out those answers from those being polled that are not so genuine, not so sincere, from others that are really giving some insight on how they really feel about a question?
Sure. Well, one thing that we do is we collect a fair amount of demographic information about our respondents, gender, party, race, age, and stuff like that. And we make sure that people are giving valid answers to those questions. A lot of the time, if people aren't taking the poll seriously, they'll start giving answers that aren't actual answers. Like if we say if you're a woman, press 1, if a man, press 2, they'll press 7, which is not any gender I know of. So
I don't know, Carol. We've seen some 6s at least. So what about people lying to pollsters? Don't you get that a lot on sensitive questions like, oh yeah, I went to church last week, and things? How do you filter that out?
Yeah, there's a couple things.
Especially with a robot.
One thing about automated polling is actually people feel less inclined to lie. They don't feel like there's a right or wrong answer the way there is with if they're talking to a live human. One example of this, unfortunately, was when Maine was having a vote on whether to keep gay marriage legal or re-illegalize it in November of 2009. All the live interview polling on that vote said that they were going to keep gay marriage legal in Maine, and we came out the day before the election and said actually they're going to ban it again by a 4-point margin, and that's what happened. What we think happened there is that people were telling the live interviewers that they were okay with gay marriage because it seemed like the nice answer, the right answer, when they really weren't. Yeah. They were happy to tell us how they really felt.
Thanks, caller. We're going to have to wrap it up.
Oh. Hey, thanks for the time, Ty. Keep up the good work.
Well, thanks.
Hey, we're going to get you unleashed to the public later. Wide audience.
All right. We'll do a solo show next week. Thanks. Our number's up there, 996-6775. It will be shortly. If you have a question for Tom Jensen, publicpolicypolling.com. You're also the lead blogger at the site. He does an amazing series of written blog posts. They're just wonderfully informative. What other Obama, Romney at this point? You think Obama's has had a steady couple of point lead that's going to still be that? You think Obama's going to continue to be our president?
I'd certainly put my money on Obama. Pretty persistent lead in the national polls, only 3 or 4 points, but it's persistent. He's always up. And what's interesting about Obama's numbers is he's doing better in a lot of the key swing states than he is nationally. For instance, last week we found him up by 8 points in Virginia. We have him up by 7 points in Colorado.
And those are important swing
I think
states.
those are probably the two most important states. I think if Obama can win Colorado and Virginia, he's going to be okay.
He was making noise about Texas today. Do you think that's realistic at all, or is he just trying to scare Romney into spending money in Texas?
Texas is the great Democratic fantasy, and I think that the Hispanic vote in Texas is getting larger and larger and larger every year. Maybe like 2020, Democrats can be competitive in Texas. Just quickly touching here in North Carolina.
Yeah.
We've polled Obama, Romney in North Carolina 20 times. 19 out of 20 times, the two of them have been within 3 points of each other. So that's why people are seeing so much campaign ads here, that we really are about the ultimate swing state this year.
What other polling outfits do you like? How much time do we have, Carol? 1 minute, okay.
I really like Survey USA, who does a lot of polling for WRAL here in North Carolina. It's an automated polling firm that does a good job. I think Quinnipiac does some really good polls in big swing states. I wish they'd come into North Carolina. But I think that really, as poll consumers, this is a cliche, but people really should look at the average of the polls. If you look at the average of the polls instead of focusing on the one that's best for Romney or the one that's best for Obama, that's what's going to get you closest to reality.
All right, Tom Jensen from Public Policy Polling. My final question is Nate Silver over at 538. Friend or foe?
It's complicated. In 2008, I think PPP and Nate were both sort of getting into it, and for the first time, and we got along really well. I think maybe our egos have gotten bigger over the years, and we don't get along as well. But
Okay,
Nate does great
foe.
work.
Nate Silver, foe. All right, thank you for watching. Take care of each other. We'll see you next week.